It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. We are affiliated throughout the country, and thank you so much for everyone. We've got great ratings. We've got a great listenership, and I appreciate the people who tune in every week because this is a way to understand what's going on with the economy, what's going on with finances, how to make more money. And so now I've been waiting to do this for about 3 or 4 weeks. One of my heroes, and I think the hero of so many of you listening to the show, is a guy who has really just been a mentor to me, and that's Phil Gramm, who I don't know if I should call him Professor Phil Gramm or Senator Phil Gramm. He was a professor of economics. I think many of you know his story. He came to Congress in, I think, the late 70s as a kind of what they used to call a centrist Democrat. And he was influential in the Reagan Revolution. He helped pass the Reagan tax cuts of 1980. He was a hawk on government spending. He did the Gramm-Latta, the famous Gramm-Latta spending reductions. He did the Gramm-Rudman bill. He ran for president and has been one of the top economic voices for economic sanity in this country. And he's, by the way, most recently, he's writing a column every couple of weeks on economics in the Wall Street Journal. So, Senator, thanks so much for coming on today.
Oh, thank you, Steve.
So let's get right down to it. You and I have been talking off air about the tariff issue. I'm concerned about it. I think you're more concerned about it than I am, but I'm a free trade guy. You taught me about free trade. So did Milton Friedman. So did so many of the great economists. But you wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal the other day, just really saying that this tariff that Trump is proposing, you say it's not going to work.
Well, it's not going to work. So, and let me start in explaining why. First of all, as you know, in that you were intimately involved in it, the Trump tax cuts and the Trump deregulatory policy produced the strongest economic growth rate in 2018 in 13 years. Yep. And triggered an expansion in employment and wages and a decline in the poverty rate that has no precedent in the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. But in the middle of 2018, President Trump imposed, using executive authority, a series of protective tariffs on steel and aluminum, and ultimately a series of other goods. And so let me just start with steel and aluminum.
Okay.
The problem is not many people work in the steel industry or the aluminum industry because labor productivity in those industries is sky high, and it's highly automated. So those protective tariffs, which did raise the price of steel and aluminum, created a very small number of jobs. But the problem is there are 40 jobs in America where people use steel and aluminum to make things. For every one job in steel and aluminum, and we lost more jobs in those industries by far than we gained in the steel and aluminum industry. And studies consistently have shown that whether we're protecting washing machines or whether we're protecting steel or aluminum, that the cost to the economy of each job that we, quote, save or create through these policies is about $800,000 or $900,000. When the jobs themselves don't pay $80,000 or $90,000.
Right.
And
so hold on, Senator, just 1 second. I want to explain because you're one of the most brilliant economists. I want to make sure people understand what you're saying because it's very important. So, just to use your example of steel, and forgive me if let me know if I've got this right. So you're saying so we put a tariff on steel to protect jobs for the steel workers, but then let's say the auto industry, the U.S. auto industry, which uses a lot of steel, right? Now they have to build the car with more expensive steel, right, because of the tariff. And that means that fewer people will buy U.S. cars because they'll be more expensive. So you're not really creating jobs. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. You're creating a handful of jobs in the steel and aluminum industry, but you're losing far more jobs in other industries that use steel in their production and aluminum in their production process. And that's the story of protectionism. And it's not that it's a new policy. It's been tried over and over again. We had the Smoot-Hawley tariff in the 1930s that deepened the Depression and made it longer and more painful.
Yes.
People get caught up in this argument that we've lost jobs in manufacturing. Well, it's true, but two things need to be understood. Number one, in 1945, the other industrial countries in the world had been destroyed in the war, and 50 million of their best workers had been killed. And we had a virtual monopoly on any heavy manufacturing for 25 years.
Right.
And if you compare what we produced and sold on the world market in the 50s and 60s and early 70s with what we sold in the 20s and 30s,
I see.
You see that what had happened is we were producing roughly half the goods and services in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That couldn't go on forever. And when Japan and Germany and other developed countries recovered from the war and became more competitive, we lost our comparative advantage in a lot of areas. And so, for example, the automobile industry, and competing principally with the Japanese in the early days, automated. And so people talk about, well, we don't have a manufacturing base. Well, it's totally false. Last year, we produced more manufacturing goods than we have ever produced, but we did it with 8% of the labor force, not 25%, which we had done and had in the mid-50s because of technology. Those jobs are never coming back.
Right. Well, by the way, a good analogy, Senator, is what's happened in agriculture. I mean, 100 years ago,
exactly, perfect.
We had about a third of all Americans working on the farm. Maybe that might be a little exaggeration, but close to 30%.
No, that's right.
All American workers were growing food. Now we grow enough food with 2.5% of our labor force in agriculture, and that means they can do other things that lead to even more productivity. And so part of this is just, as you say, technology. And I always say the old joke is, you want to create 10 million jobs in America, just outlaw farm tractors, and we can all work in the fields again.
Well, a perfect example of this is my mama left a tenant farm 85 years ago to go to Columbus, Georgia to work in the Eagle and Phoenix mill. And she worked there until she went to school at night and acquired more skills and got a better job. And then she spent the rest of her life trying to eliminate two jobs in the mill, my brother's job and my job. And she succeeded. Now, does it make any sense whatsoever to raise the price of clothing being sold in Walmart with the idea that my grandchildren are going to drop out of college and go to work in a cotton mill? None whatsoever.
Yeah.
The cotton mill would be unwelcome if it came back. We have a fully employed economy. We want people working in industries of the future,
Yes.
not the industries of the past.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And by the way, I'm talking to Phil Gramm, the great former senator from the great state of Texas, former congressman from the state of Texas, former university professor in economics, one of the architects of the Reagan Revolution. It would not have happened without Phil Gramm. Senator, I'd love to keep you over for a few minutes. Could you stay for one more segment?
Oh, sure I can.
Okay. All right. We're going to take a quick break, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I'm economist Steve Moore, and it's a thrill to have on the line with me one of the top economists in the country, and that, of course, is the great Phil Gramm, who served in the United States Senate, was an architect of the Reagan Revolution. It would not have happened without him. And by the way, just quickly, what happened to the Democratic Party? You were a Democrat.
Well, I was a Democrat because of the Civil War. But what happened to the Democratic
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, too long ago, in terms of the South changing. My grandmother and mother never voted in the early days for a Republican, even though they thought like Republicans.
Right.
So, look, when I ran, there were no Republicans in my district. And I didn't think party mattered until I got to Washington, and then I discovered it mattered to everybody else except me. And then when Reagan came, I had offered a budget with David Stockman in 1980, and when Reagan was elected and asked me to author the budget in the House, I wasn't going to let partisanship stand between me and what I thought America needed. And then when the Democrats, in reprisal, threw me off the Budget Committee, it could have changed parties, but I thought I should resign and go home and let people decide do they want me to stay on as a Republican. So that's how it happened.
And that's amazing. So, but why do you think the Democratic Party has moved? I mean, it just isn't the Democratic Party that you grew up in. It's not the Democratic. You're a little older than I am, not a whole lot older, but it certainly isn't the Democratic Party I grew up in. What happened?
Well, it became the party of government.
Yeah.
The Democratic political constituency is now primarily driven by people who either want the government to give them something, or want the government to do something that they support that other people are not voluntarily willing to pay for.
Right. Well, ain't that the truth? I mean, it just saddens me to see, how I remember a famous story that Arthur Laffer tells me. You were there in 86 when we did the 1986 tax reform bill, when we cut the top tax rate to 28%, got rid of a lot of the loopholes. Do you recall, you probably recall this, that bill passed in the United States Senate 97-3. And I think the three no votes were Republicans. Today, I don't think you get one single Democrat in the entire Congress to vote for a 28% tax rate.
No, and actually, we paid for the tax reduction by eliminating deductions and subsidies.
Yes.
And so the tax code became very efficient.
It did.
I long for those days again.
I do too.
1986 tax change was one of the great legislative actions in the history of the United States Congress.
I could not agree more, and I wish we could do it again. I still hold out hope that we have some sensible Democrats. You know, as Arthur Laffer would say, you want a broad base and a low rate. And by the way, what Kamala Harris wants is to add all these new loopholes. If you do this, that, the other thing, and then she wants to raise the rates through the roof again. So that's like anti-tax reform.
Yeah, well, look, the tax code has become the biggest welfare program in America, with tax credits going to people that don't pay taxes.
Terrible. Okay, so we've only got about 4 or 5 minutes left, and I want to challenge you on a couple of things. I'm kind of speaking on behalf of I'm speaking on some of my listeners because they ask me these questions all the time. And I agree with about 90% of what you were saying, but here's a couple of things I'm troubled. I'm going to take the Donald Trump position, okay? So what Donald Trump would say if he listened to you, and I know you've talked to President Trump, he would say, look, you don't get it, Phil Gramm. I'm just using these tariffs as a negotiating tactic so that other countries will reduce their tariffs. And by the way, I've seen him do that in person, and in some cases it worked. So what's wrong with that?
No, look, if he would do that, I would be absolutely delighted.
Okay.
And we could start with a free trade agreement with Great Britain.
Yep.
We could expand our trade in Asia. We could unify the European Union and NAFTA in a trade agreement. We sure as hell don't want their regulatory burden. But, yeah, there are many things we could do. And, Steve, I hope that is the case, but I'm fearful. I know the president has a tendency to overstate and exaggerate. But I am concerned. I mean, here, and there's one other element of protectionism people need to think about. What right does the government have to make me pay twice as much for sugar as it sells on the world market so that 3,400 people can produce sugar?
Yeah. No, it's crazy.
How is that? I mean, how can you look in the mirror and be for that?
Yeah. And by the way, those people who produce the sugar are pretty rich too.
Well, look, most subsidies go to rich people.
Okay, so let me ask you the other part of the equation then, and that is we need to have a tax system, right? We have a big government, and we need to collect the revenues to pay for the government, and so we need, all taxes have negative effects, and so I guess the question I'd ask you is, let's just say that we're going to do let's say a 10 or 15% across the board tariff, but in exchange for that, we're going to make the Trump tax cuts permanent, full expensing for American businesses, a lot of the things that you like and I like. I guess what I'm saying is that might be a better way to tax the American citizens than just through high income taxes and high payroll taxes and, other taxes. So what do you say to that?
There are two problems with it. One, the distributional effect of it is terrible in terms of the burden falling on working people. Mm-hmm. If you go into Walmart, you look at where things are made. If you take groceries out of the picture, and a lot of groceries come from overseas, seasonal fruits, things like that. But probably 85% of the items in Walmart are imported. And they're the people who are going to pay these costs. Also, half of imports are component parts that we use in manufacturing.
Oh, I see. Right.
And also, again, what happens with a tariff is you are encouraging people to produce a product that we can buy cheaper abroad, but to produce that product, we're taking capital and labor away from something we're producing that's of higher value. So it just, in the end, does not make more sense. It doesn't make any sense.
So Donald Trump, last thing, and then I'll let you go. I appreciate you. I'm talking to the great Senator Phil Gramm, who was a revolutionary when he came to Washington. A lot of people come to Washington and don't make an impact, and boy, what an impact you made. But Trump, and just quickly, we've only got 90 seconds left, but Trump says reciprocity, okay? Reciprocity. You're going to hit us with tariffs. We're going to hit you back.
Well, look, we're hitting people that haven't hit us, okay? And secondly, what is my reciprocity with the grocery store? Walmart buys nothing from me, but I buy from Walmart. I've got Elon Musk's satellite on my house in the country. Now, I could get mad at him because he doesn't buy anything from me and go tear it down. but it's 1/10 the price of the alternative, and it's 3 times as good. So I would be cutting off my nose to spite my face. That's smart.
That is a great answer, Senator Phil. By the way, is our good friend Ted Cruz, is he going to be okay? Are we going to get him over the finish line in Texas?
I sure hope so. I'd be greatly distressed if he lost.
Me too. That's Senator Phil Gramm. Thank you, Senator. I'd love to have you on again because you've educated our folks. And I think some people are not going to agree with everything you just said, but I'm so happy you laid it out in a professorial way. And next time I'm going to give an exam to my listeners to make sure they were listening to what you said. That's Phil Gramm.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Okay, folks, this is the More Money Show on WABC, and we'll be right back.